The afternoon sun hung low over New Terra, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Emily Parker locked up the campus bookstore and headed toward Miller's Grocery, her beat-up backpack slung over one shoulder. At 19 she'd gotten used to the routine. Work, school, groceries, homework, sleep, repeat. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her university sweatshirt had seen better days. There was still a coffee stain on the sleeve from yesterday's study session. New Terra wasn't like Earth. Sure, humans had built most of the colony, but walk down any street and you'd see a dozen different species going about their business. The insectoid Chitauri ran most of the tech shops. The massive Krogar worked construction. And the Draconians, the dragon-like beings who controlled half the known galaxy, they showed up occasionally for trade negotiations or diplomatic meetings. Emily pushed through the automatic doors of Miller's Grocery, grabbing a red plastic basket. The familiar fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she made her way down the aisles. Her budget was tight this month. Tuition payment had hit harder than expected, so she stuck to the basics. Instant noodles, cheap coffee, a loaf of bread, some eggs. Nothing fancy. The store had the usual Saturday afternoon crowd. A few students like herself, some families with kids running around, and a couple of alien species she'd grown accustomed to seeing. Near the pharmaceutical section, she noticed an elderly draconian examining bottles of pain medication. That was unusual. Most draconians she'd seen were impressive, tall, proud, covered in gleaming scales that caught the light like polished metal. They wore expensive robes and walked like they owned whatever room they entered. This one was different. He was hunched over slightly, his copper-colored scales dull and faded like old pennies left in the rain. Instead of fancy robes, he wore a simple gray jacket and worn pants that looked like they'd been through the wash too many times. Something about the way he moved seemed heavy, like he was carrying weight nobody else could see. Emily felt a pang of something, sympathy maybe, but she kept shopping. It wasn't her business. She finished gathering her items and headed toward the checkout lanes. Register 3 had the shortest line, so she joined it, scrolling through her phone while she waited. That's when she noticed the elderly draconian was at the front of the line, unloading his groceries onto the conveyor belt. His purchases were humble. A loaf of bread, 3 cans of soup, some medical supplies, bandages and ointment, and a few other basic items. Nothing that suggested wealth or status. Emily watched as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small credit chip, the kind everyone used for payments. He tapped it against the payment terminal. Beep. The machine's negative sound cut through the ambient store noise. The draconian's brow furrowed. He tried again, tapping the chip more firmly against the reader. Beep. Same result. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with blonde hair going gray at the temples, let out an audible sigh. Her name tag read Janet, and her expression said she'd dealt with enough problems for one day. "Sir, your chip isn't working," she said, her voice flat and unsympathetic. The old dragon looked down at the chip in his clawed hand, confusion evident on his aged face. His hands trembled slightly as he turned it over. "I apologize," he said, his voice deep and resonant despite his apparent frailty. "It worked yesterday at the pharmacy. Perhaps if I try once more." "The system says either insufficient funds or malfunction," Janet interrupted. Behind the draconian, the line was growing. Emily could see people checking their watches, shifting impatiently. She was 3 people back now, watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort. The dragon's golden eyes, still bright despite the dimness of his scales, swept over his groceries. "I see. Perhaps I could remove some items then." His voice carried a careful dignity, the kind of pride that refused to break even when things got difficult. He began pulling items from the bags Janet had already started filling. First the medical supplies. He set the bandages and ointment aside with steady hands. Then half the food. The bread stayed, but 2 of the soup cans went back. He was calculating, figuring out what he could live without. Emily felt something twist in her chest. She knew that look. That specific kind of pride mixed with embarrassment. Her grandmother had been exactly the same way in her final years, stubbornly independent, refusing help even when she desperately needed it. Gran had once tried to carry all her groceries in one trip and ended up spilling everything in the parking lot rather than admit she needed someone to help her make 2 trips. The line behind the draconian was getting restless. Someone muttered something under their breath. Janet drummed her fingers on the counter, waiting impatiently. The old dragon continued sorting through his groceries with slow, deliberate movements, trying to maintain what dignity he could. Emily didn't let herself think about it too much. Overthinking led to talking yourself out of things. She stepped out of her place in line and walked up to Register 3. "Excuse me," she said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. Suddenly everyone in the vicinity was looking at her. I'll cover it. The Draconian turned, and Emily found herself looking into eyes that were far older than she'd initially realized. They were golden, flecked with copper, and they held something ancient in them. Centuries of experience, maybe? Lost. And something else she couldn't quite name. Those eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle, like he was reading something written there that she herself couldn't see. Young lady, I cannot accept, he began, his tone formal and careful. It's 47 credits, Emily interrupted gently. She was already pulling out her own credit chip, tapping it against the reader before he could protest further. My grandma always told me that if I ever needed help, someone would be there. So I'm just paying it forward. No big deal. The machine beeped cheerfully, transaction approved. Janet bagged up all the groceries without comment, already mentally moving on to whatever came next in her shift. The people behind them in line started shuffling forward, crisis averted, nothing more to see here. But the old Draconian didn't move. He stood there, still as stone, staring at Emily like he'd never seen another living being before. His gaze traced over her face, the scatter of freckles across her nose and cheeks, the gray eyes that her mom always said were kind eyes, the oversized university sweatshirt with its faded logo and that stupid coffee stain she could never quite get out. What is your name, child? He asked quietly. The way he said it made it sound less like a question and more like something important, something that mattered. Emily. Emily Parker. She offered a small smile, feeling awkward under that intense golden stare. Seriously though, it's really not a big deal. Have a good day, okay? She turned to head back to her spot in line, but his voice stopped her cold. Emily Parker. He spoke her name like it was a formal declaration, each syllable measured and deliberate, like he was recording it somewhere permanent. This kindness will be remembered. You have my word, what you have done today matters far more than you can possibly know. Emily laughed nervously, shrugging. It's just groceries. Really. Don't worry about it. The old dragon gathered his bags carefully, then did something that made several nearby shoppers stop and stare. He bowed to her. Not a small nod, but a deep, formal bow that seemed to belong in a throne room, not a grocery store. Then he straightened and walked toward the exit, moving with that same contradiction she'd noticed before, frail but somehow dignified, like old royalty fallen on hard times. Emily watched him disappear through the automatic doors, then shook her head and returned to her place in line. Within minutes, she'd paid for her own modest collection of food and was heading back to her car. The whole encounter already felt surreal, fading into the background of just another weird day on a colony world where dozens of species crossed paths. She drove home through familiar streets, parked in her usual spot at the apartment complex, and climbed 3 flights of stairs to her small studio. By the time she'd put away her groceries and collapsed onto her second-hand couch with her laptop, she'd almost forgotten about the old Draconian entirely. She had homework to do. A paper due Monday. Real life to worry about. She had absolutely no idea that in less than 6 hours, 12 warships would appear in the sky above her building. She didn't know that the old dragon she'd helped wasn't really named Thomas. His true name was Victor Blackscale, Lord Commander of the Draconian Imperial Fleet, brother to the Dragon Emperor himself, holder of the Crimson Star of Valor, and the most decorated military commander in 10,000 years of galactic history. And she'd just triggered an ancient law that would change everything. 6 hours had passed since the grocery store incident, and Emily had almost forgotten about it entirely. She sat cross-legged on her worn couch, laptop balanced on her knees, trying to make sense of her economics assignment. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of her ancient refrigerator and the distant sounds of Saturday evening traffic below. She'd made herself some instant ramen, the cheap kind that cost 30 cents a pack, and was halfway through a paragraph about supply chain management when the world suddenly shifted. The entire building shook. Not like a minor tremor or someone dropping something heavy upstairs. This was different. The walls rattled. Her coffee mug slid across the table. The lights flickered. Emily grabbed her laptop before it could slide off her lap, her heart suddenly pounding. Earthquake? New Terra didn't get earthquakes. The colony was geologically stable. That was one of the main selling points when humanity had settled here 40 years ago. She stood up, moving toward the window, and that's when she saw them. 12 ships hung in the sky above her neighborhood. Not small ships. Not cargo vessels or personal transports. These were warships, massive, angular things that seemed to swallow the evening light. Their hulls were dark metal etched with glowing symbols she recognized as Draconian script. Each one had to be at least a kilometer long, bristling with weapon systems that looked like they could level a city block without much effort. Emily's mouth went dry. She pressed her face against the window glass, trying to process what she was seeing. The ships hadn't been there a minute ago. They just appeared, like someone had flipped a switch, and suddenly there they were, hovering impossibly in the atmosphere directly above her apartment complex. Her phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, news alerts, social media updates, all coming in so fast her phone actually lagged. She swiped one open with shaking fingers. The headline made her stomach drop. Draconian fleet appears over New Terra, colonial defense forces on high alert, possible invasion. Invasion. The word hit her like cold water. Emily's mind raced. Should she run? Where would she even go? The ships were right above her building. If they wanted to attack, she wouldn't make it to the stairs before. Her television, which she'd left on mute in the background, suddenly blared to life at full volume. The emergency broadcast system had kicked in. A news anchor with barely controlled panic in her voice was speaking rapidly. Repeat, this is not a drill. 12 Draconian Imperial warships have materialized over the student quarter of New Terra City. Colonial Governor Hayes is attempting to establish communication with the vessels. Citizens are advised to remain calm and await further instructions. Do not attempt to approach. Emily's hands were trembling. She looked back out the window. The ships just hung there, silent and menacing. Then, as she watched, a smaller craft detached from the largest vessel, the one directly above her building. A shuttle, sleek and silver, began descending through the atmosphere. It was coming down, right toward her street. Her phone rang, the shrill sound making her jump so hard she nearly dropped it. The caller ID showed building security. She answered with shaking hands. Hello? Miss Parker? The security guard, Dennis, the older guy who usually sat at the front desk reading mystery novels, sounded absolutely terrified. Miss Parker, are you okay? Are you in danger? There's something landing outside and we don't know if we should evacuate or... I don't know, Emily said honestly, watching the shuttle descend. I don't know what's happening. Is someone threatening you? Did you see something? Why are they here? Dennis's questions came rapid fire, desperate for answers she didn't have. The shuttle landed in the middle of the street outside her building with surprising grace for something its size. Emily watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as a ramp extended from its side. Dennis, I have to go, she whispered and hung up before he could respond. Figures emerged from the shuttle. Draconian soldiers, she could tell from their distinctive silhouettes even from 4 stories up. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. Their armor gleamed even in the fading evening light, polished to a mirror shine. Gold and silver accents marked them as something special. Elite forces maybe. Royal Guards. They formed 2 lines on either side of the shuttle's ramp, creating a corridor of armored warriors. Each one stood perfectly still, weapons held at attention. It looked ceremonial. Like something out of a historical documentary about ancient Earth royalty, not a military invasion. Emily couldn't look away. What were they doing? Who were they waiting for? More figures descended the ramp. These wore robes instead of armor, flowing garments in deep purple and silver that marked them as high-ranking officials. Draconians who clearly held serious positions of authority. And they were all walking toward her building. Her phone rang again. Then her doorbell camera chimed. Then someone knocked on her apartment door, actual physical knocking, polite and measured. 3 steady raps. Emily stood frozen in her living room, her mind spinning. None of this made sense. Why would Draconian royalty be at her door? She was nobody. A college student working part-time at a bookstore, barely scraping by on student loans and instant noodles. She hadn't done anything. She hadn't. The grocery store. The old dragon. Could this possibly be related to that? No. That was insane. She'd paid for 47 credits worth of groceries. That didn't warrant a military response. Another knock, still polite but more insistent. Emily's legs felt like jelly as she crossed her tiny apartment. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob. Whatever was on the other side of this door was going to change things. She could feel it in her bones, that sense that life was about to split into before and after. She opened the door. A Draconian stood in her hallway, and Emily had to tilt her head back to look at his face. He was easily 7 feet tall, his scales a deep crimson red that seemed to shimmer in the fluorescent hallway lighting. He wore armor that was clearly ceremonial, too ornate for actual combat, etched with symbols and decorations that probably indicated rank and achievements. His golden eyes met hers, and then he did something that made Emily's brain short-circuit. He bowed. Deeply. The kind of bow you'd give to someone extremely important. "Miss Emily Parker," he said, his voice formal and carrying the weight of ceremony. "I am High Commander Gregory Ironwing, Supreme General of the Draconian Imperial Fleet. I apologize for the dramatic arrival. May I request entry to your residence? I promise you are in no danger whatsoever. Quite the opposite, in fact." Emily's mouth opened but no sound came out. Supreme General. Fleet Commander. These weren't titles you used lightly. Behind Gregory Ironwing, she could see more guards in the hallway, and beyond them, several other important-looking Draconians in elaborate robes. Her neighbors' doors were cracked open. She could see eyes peeking out, phones recording everything. What? Emily finally managed. "Why are you? I don't understand." "May we enter?" Gregory asked again, still maintaining that respectful tone. "What I need to explain is quite significant, and perhaps best discussed in private rather than in a hallway." Emily stepped back on autopilot, and suddenly her tiny studio apartment, all 400 square feet of it, was filling with draconian nobility and elite guards. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking corners and windows with professional thoroughness. But they were also being incredibly careful not to touch her things, stepping around her textbooks and coffee table with almost comical caution. Then someone else entered. The old dragon from the grocery store. Except he didn't look old anymore. Or rather, he still looked elderly, but everything else had changed. Instead of a worn gray jacket, he wore robes that seemed to capture light itself. Deep midnight blue fabric shot through with silver thread that actually glowed. Symbols Emily didn't recognize were embroidered across the chest and shoulders. His copper scales, which had seemed so dull and faded earlier, now caught the apartment's lighting with a burnished gleam. But it was his bearing that had changed most dramatically. That hunched, tired posture was gone. He stood straight now, radiating an authority that seemed to fill the room. This was someone who commanded respect, who'd held power, who'd seen and done things Emily couldn't imagine. Their eyes met, and he smiled, a small, genuine expression that somehow made him look both ancient and kind. "Hello again, Emily Parker," he said softly. Gregory Ironwing stepped forward, his expression serious. "Miss Parker, you have done something today of extraordinary significance to the Draconian Empire. Something that invokes ancient law and tradition going back thousands of years." Emily's head was spinning. I paid for groceries. That's all I did. I don't understand why." The old dragon moved closer, his golden eyes warm despite the intensity in them. "Please let me explain. My name is not Thomas, as the name tag suggested. I am Victor Blackscale, Lord Commander of the Imperial Fleet, holder of the Crimson Star, brother to Emperor Raymond Starfire of the Draconian Empire." The name Victor Blackscale sent a shock of recognition through Emily's memory. Even humans knew that name. Victor Blackscale was legendary, the dragon who'd won the Century Wars, who'd united a dozen species under draconian protection, who'd written military strategy texts that were still studied across the galaxy. There were statues of him. Historical documentaries. He was the equivalent of Alexander the Great and George Washington rolled into one. And she'd bought him soup and bandages at Miller's grocery. "I have been living in exile here for 5 years," Victor continued, his voice gentle. "After my bonded mate passed, I relinquished all titles, all wealth, all recognition. I wanted to disappear. To fade away quietly. I was ready for my long life to simply end." Emily's throat tightened. She heard the pain in his words, the weight of loss. "And then you helped me," Victor said simply. "Not because you knew who I was. Not because you wanted something in return. You helped me because I needed it, and you are the kind of person who helps when help is needed. Do you understand how rare that is? How precious?" Emily started, but Victor raised a clawed hand gently. "You invoked an ancient law called the Sacred Debt. And more than that, you reminded me that kindness still exists in this universe. You saved me, Emily Parker. Not from embarrassment at a checkout line, but from something much darker." Emily looked around her apartment, at the Supreme General standing at attention, at the guards lining her walls, at Victor Blackscale himself looking at her with something like reverence, and felt her knees go weak. "What does this mean?" she whispered. Gregory Ironwing's expression was grave. "It means, Miss Parker, that as of this moment, you are under the personal protection of the Draconian throne. Your life has just changed in ways you cannot yet imagine." Emily sat down heavily on her couch, her mind reeling. Outside her window, 12 warships hung in the sky. Inside her apartment, the most powerful military figures in the known galaxy waited for her response. All because she'd been kind to a stranger. Victor settled into Emily's second-hand armchair with surprising grace for someone his size. The chair creaked under his weight, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Gregory Ironwing remained standing near the door, hands clasped behind his back in a military posture. The guards had positioned themselves along the walls of her tiny apartment, silent and watchful. Emily sat on her couch, still clutching a throw pillow to her chest like it might protect her from whatever was happening. "Let me start from the beginning," Victor said, his deep voice somehow both gentle and commanding. "Among my people there exists an ancient code of honor. We call it the Sacred Debt. It dates back nearly 3,000 years to the founding days of our empire." Emily nodded slowly, trying to focus despite the surreal nature of having legendary war heroes in her living room. Outside her window she could still see the massive warships hanging in the darkening sky, their lights beginning to glow as evening deepened into night. "The Sacred Debt is invoked under very specific circumstances," Victor continued. "When someone, anyone from any species, shows genuine kindness to a draconian in true need, without knowing their status or identity, without expecting reward or recognition, that draconian becomes honor-bound to repay that kindness. Not with simple gratitude but with protection, elevation, and lifelong loyalty." "But I just paid for groceries," Emily said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. It was 47 credits. That's nothing." A sad smile crossed Victor's ancient face. "The amount is irrelevant. It's the nature of the act that matters. Let me tell you what you actually did today, Emily Parker." He leaned forward slightly, his golden eyes holding hers. 5 years ago my bonded mate, my wife in your human terms, died. Among draconians, bonding is not like human marriage. When we bond we link our very souls. We feel what our mate feels. Share their joys and sorrows. When she died, half of myself died with her." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. The raw pain in his voice was almost unbearable to hear. "I couldn't continue as Lord Commander," Victor said quietly. "I couldn't stand in throne rooms and command fleets while feeling empty inside. So I did something that shocked my entire family. I walked away. I relinquished every title, every rank, every privilege. I took the name Thomas Gray and came here to New Terra to live as a common citizen." "Why?" Emily asked. "Because I wanted to disappear," Victor said simply. "I wanted to fade away quietly. I was tired, Emily. Tired of living. I'm over 900 years old. I have fought in 73 wars. I've watched friends die, seen civilizations rise and fall, commanded millions of soldiers. And without her, I saw no point in continuing." The apartment was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic sounds from below. "I had been living here for 5 years," Victor continued, "working odd jobs, keeping to myself. Each day becoming a little more certain that I was ready for my life to end, that I had lived long enough." He paused, his gaze distant. "This morning I woke up and realized I had no reason to see tomorrow. I went to that grocery store planning for it to be one of my last trips anywhere." Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God. And then you helped me," Victor said, his voice strengthening. A young human woman working her way through school, counting every credit, stepped forward and paid for a stranger's groceries. "You didn't see a legendary commander. You didn't see someone who could reward you. You saw an old person who needed help and you helped. No hesitation. No expectation. Just simple, pure kindness." He stood up, his impressive height making Emily's apartment feel even smaller. "In that moment you reminded me that goodness still exists in this universe. That not everything is politics and war and loss. That there are still people who help strangers in grocery stores for no reason other than it's the right thing to do." Emily wiped at her eyes, not sure what to say. Gregory Ironwing spoke up from his position by the door. "Miss Parker, what Lord Commander Blackscale isn't mentioning is that your act triggered something beyond the standard sacred debt. There is a provision, one that hasn't been invoked in over 800 years, called the Sacred Debt Ascendant." "What's the difference?" Emily managed to ask. "The standard sacred debt applies when kindness is shown to any draconian in need," Gregory explained. "The Sacred Debt Ascendant is reserved for acts of kindness that literally save a life or restore hope to someone who had lost it completely. The distinction is significant." Victor nodded. "By imperial law, law that has stood unchanged for millennia, you are now under the personal protection of the draconian throne. You have been granted the title Friend of the First Claw. Do you understand what that means?" Emily shook her head mutely. "It means you hold a rank equivalent to the Emperor's own children," Gregory said. "You are considered part of the imperial family by law. An attack on you is an attack on the throne itself. An insult to you is an insult to the Emperor. You have the right to request Imperial aid, to travel freely throughout Draconian space, to call upon our resources and protection. The room spun slightly. Emily gripped the couch cushion to steady herself. That's insane. I don't want that. I didn't do it for a reward. I was just being a decent person. Victor's smile widened. And that, Emily Parker, is precisely why you are worthy of this honor. Someone who sought such status would never receive it. The sacred dead ascendant can only be triggered by pure motivation, untainted by expectation of gain. But I don't want to be nobility or whatever, Emily protested, standing up. I'm a college student. I work at a bookstore. I eat instant noodles for dinner. I have student loans. This is crazy. Your humility makes you more worthy, not less, Victor said gently. But I must be honest with you. Whether you want this or not, it is done. The moment I recognized what you had done, the moment I invoked the sacred dead ascendant, it became imperial law. News of this is already spreading across the galaxy. As if to punctuate his words, Emily's phone buzzed frantically on the coffee table. She glanced at it and saw hundreds of notifications. Messages from friends, from her parents, from people she hadn't talked to in years. News alerts. Social media mentions. Her name was trending on 3 different platforms. The 12 warships above us serve 2 purposes, Gregory said. First, they are ceremonial recognition. The arrival of the Imperial Honor Guard is how we announce to the galaxy that you are now under our protection. Second, they are practical security. By tomorrow morning, every government, corporation, criminal organization, and news outlet in known space will know your name and what you represent. Emily sank back onto the couch, overwhelmed. This is too much. I can't. I don't know how to be whatever you're saying I am now. Victor knelt in front of her, bringing his ancient eyes level with hers. Despite his size, despite the armor and robes and centuries of command experience, his expression was kind. You don't have to be anything other than what you already are. That's the point. You are exactly the person who deserves this honor because you don't want it. What happens now? Emily whispered. Gregory stepped forward. By imperial law, you must formally present yourself before Emperor Raymond Starfire on the Draconian homeworld. The ceremony must occur within 30 days. It will be attended by leaders from across the galaxy, representatives from every major species, diplomats, nobles, military commanders. It will be the most significant diplomatic event in decades. Emily's stomach dropped. I have to speak in front of all those people? The ceremony is mostly symbolic, Victor assured her. You will be presented to the Emperor. He will formally acknowledge you as friend of the First Claw. You will receive the physical emblem of your new status. Then there will be a reception where you'll meet various dignitaries. I will be with you every step of the way. I am honor-bound to guide and protect you now. Can I refuse? Emily asked quietly. Can I just say no thank you and go back to my normal life? Victor and Gregory exchanged glances. Finally, Victor spoke carefully. Technically, yes. You could refuse the honor. But doing so would be interpreted as an insult to the Empire. It would create a diplomatic incident of enormous proportions. Relations between humanity and the Draconian Empire would suffer. Your own government would likely pressure you to accept. So I don't really have a choice, Emily said flatly. You have a choice, Victor corrected gently. But every choice has consequences. If you accept, your life changes dramatically. You gain protection, status, and responsibility you never asked for. If you refuse, you create chaos for your entire species and likely face pressure from every direction. Neither option is easy. Emily looked around her tiny apartment, at the dirty dishes in her sink, the textbooks scattered across her coffee table, the poster of Earth she'd hung up because she missed home. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been finishing a paper by Monday. Now she was apparently galactic nobility because she'd been nice to someone at a grocery store. I need time to think, she said. Of course, Victor agreed, standing. But Emily, I need you to understand something. In my 900 years, I have met emperors and warriors, scholars and saints. Most of them would have walked past an old dragon struggling at a checkout line. You didn't? That matters more than you know. Gregory moved toward the door, the guards falling in behind him. We'll maintain a security perimeter around your building. Please don't leave without escort, for your own safety. The galaxy is about to become very interested in you, and not all that interest will be friendly. As they filed out, Victor paused at the door. Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow will be overwhelming. But know this, you saved my life today, Emily Parker. Not from death in a grocery store but from something worse. From giving up. I am in your debt far more than you can imagine, and I will spend whatever remains of my life ensuring you never regret showing kindness to a stranger. Then he was gone, and Emily was alone in her apartment with 12 warships hanging in the sky above her and the entire galaxy learning her name. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and called the one person she needed most right now. "Mom," she said when the line connected. "Something really weird just happened." Emily didn't sleep that night. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw warships hanging in the sky or remembered the weight in Victor's voice when he talked about wanting his life to end. Her phone never stopped buzzing, notifications coming in so fast that she eventually just turned it face down on her nightstand and tried to ignore the constant vibration. By sunrise, the world had gone completely insane. She made the mistake of checking the news while brewing coffee. Every major outlet across human space was running the same story. Her student ID photo, the one where her hair looked terrible and she hadn't been wearing any makeup, was plastered across screens throughout the galaxy. "Human student granted highest draconian honor," read one headline. "Emily Parker, the girl who changed everything," declared another. One tabloid had gone with "College kid now dragon royalty, full story inside." Her social media accounts had exploded overnight. Thousands of messages, most from complete strangers. Some were congratulatory. Others were marriage proposals, which was deeply weird. A surprising number were from people claiming to be long-lost relatives who'd love to reconnect. Several corporations offered her endorsement deals. 3 different literary agents wanted to represent her for a book deal she hadn't written. And then there were the other messages. The angry ones. "Humans don't deserve this honor," one message read. "You're from a primitive species that barely made it to space a century ago. This is an insult to every advanced civilization in the galaxy." Another was more direct. "You think you're special? You're just a human who got lucky. This won't last." Some were threatening enough that Emily's hands shook as she scrolled through them. She set the phone down and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, trying to steady herself. A knock at her door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw it was Victor, looking significantly less intimidating in simple dark clothing rather than ceremonial robes. She let him in quickly. "You've seen the news?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Hard to miss it when you're apparently the most famous human alive," Emily said, hearing the edge in her own voice. "Sorry. I didn't sleep much." "Neither did I," Victor admitted, settling into her armchair again. "I've been monitoring the galactic response. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Victor sighed, a sound like wind through a canyon. "The human colonial government is ecstatic. They see this as a massive diplomatic opportunity. Your Governor Hayes has already issued 3 statements about humanity's friendship with the Draconian Empire. Several ambassadors are requesting meetings with you." "Great," Emily muttered. "But not everyone shares that enthusiasm," Victor continued carefully. "There are factions, some quite powerful, who view your elevation as problematic. The Zorathian Collective issued a formal complaint this morning. They believe humans are too young a species to receive such honors. Several independent worlds have echoed that sentiment." Emily felt her stomach twist. "So people hate me now? For accepting help that I didn't even ask for?" "Not hate," Victor corrected. "But resentment, certainly. You represent a shift in the galactic power structure, whether you intended to or not. Some species have spent centuries trying to gain the favor you received by accident." Her phone buzzed again. Emily glanced at it and saw a message from her best friend Jessica. "There are news drones outside your building. Are you okay?" She walked to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. Sure enough, dozens of small flying cameras hovered at various distances, all pointed at her apartment. On the street below, a crowd had gathered, some holding signs she couldn't quite read from this distance. Security barriers had been erected overnight, with draconian guards in armor standing at regular intervals. "I can't live like this," Emily said quietly. "This is insane." "It gets more complicated," Victor said, his tone apologetic. "We've intercepted communications from several criminal organizations. Some see you as a valuable hostage, someone they could ransom for enormous political leverage. Others view you as a threat, since your protection status gives you the legal right to call upon Imperial military forces." Emily turned from the window, feeling cold despite her warm apartment. "Someone wants to kidnap me? They won't succeed," Victor said firmly. "That's why the security presence is so extensive. But yes, you need to understand the reality of your situation. You're no longer just Emily Parker, college student. You're Emily Parker, friend of the First Claw, and that makes you a target. A message notification popped up on her laptop. Then another. Then 50 more in rapid succession. Emily closed the laptop without looking. Can I even go to class? She asked. I have an exam on Tuesday. I have a shift at the bookstore tomorrow. I have a life, Victor. Or I had one anyway. Victor's expression was genuinely sympathetic. The security team strongly advises against you maintaining your normal routine. Your university campus would need to be locked down completely. Every student would need security screening. It would disrupt thousands of lives. So that's it? I just stay here? In this apartment? Forever? Of course not, Victor said. But your life has changed, Emily. I won't lie to you about that. The question isn't whether things are different, they are. The question is how you adapt to this new reality. Emily sank onto her couch, feeling defeated. Maybe I should just refuse the honor. Tell the Emperor thanks but no thanks and let everything go back to normal. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. Emily's voice cracked. I wanted to finish my degree. Get a decent job. Maybe travel a little. Normal stuff. Not this. Not guards and death threats and diplomatic incidents. Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of his 9 centuries. I've lived a very long time, Emily. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched as fate chose certain individuals for roles they never sought. It happened to me when I was young, barely a century old. I wanted to be a scholar, not a warrior. But war came to my homeworld and suddenly I was thrust into command. He leaned forward, his golden eyes intense. I could have refused. Could have hidden away and let others lead. But I learned something important. Sometimes life doesn't ask what we want. Sometimes it simply presents us with circumstances, and our only real choice is how we respond. That's not exactly comforting, Emily said. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be true. Victor's tone softened. You showed me kindness when I needed it most. You acted from your heart without calculation or expectation. That's rare, Emily. That's precious. And now you face a choice. Some choice, she muttered. Accept and have my life turned upside down, or refuse and create a diplomatic disaster. The choice isn't really about accepting or refusing, Victor said. It's about who you decide to be moving forward. Will you be someone who lets these circumstances destroy who you are? Or will you be someone who faces them with the same kindness and integrity you showed a stranger in a grocery store? Emily's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her mom calling. Again. They'd talked for 2 hours last night, her mother alternating between excitement and terror. Her dad had been quieter, but she'd heard the worry in his voice. I need to think, Emily said. Take whatever time you need, Victor agreed, standing to leave. But know this, whatever you decide, I will support you. I am bound by honor, yes, but more than that, I genuinely care about your well-being. You saved my life. That creates a bond that goes beyond legal obligations. After he left, Emily spent the day in a fog of phone calls and messages. Her parents called 3 more times. Her academic advisor called, confused about her absence. The university president called personally, offering support and also gently asking if she might consider making a statement that mentioned how great the university was. Jessica managed to get through the security perimeter and came up to her apartment, bringing pizza and wine coolers. They sat on Emily's couch like they had dozens of times before, except this time there were warships visible through the window. This is completely nuts, Jessica said, gesturing with a slice of pizza. You're like actually famous. My mom saw you on the news. My mom. She never watches the news. I don't want to be famous, Emily said tiredly. I want to be normal. Yeah, but that ship has kind of sailed. Literally. There are 12 ships. Jessica took a bite of pizza thinking. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Yes you do, Jessica said. You're going to accept. You know you are. Because refusing would hurt a bunch of people and cause problems and you're too nice for that. You literally became dragon nobility because you're too nice to let an old guy struggle at checkout. Emily laughed despite herself. When you put it that way it sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous. But it's also kind of amazing. Like this whole thing happened because you were a good person. That's actually pretty cool. That night, Emily made another call home. Her parents appeared on the holographic display, sitting together on their familiar couch in Ohio. Her mom had been crying, Emily could tell from her red eyes. Her dad looked exhausted. Sweetheart, we're worried about you, her mom said immediately. I know, Mom. I'm worried about me too. Her father spoke up, his voice steady. Emily, you know we'll support whatever you decide. But I want you to think about something. This whole situation, it started because you helped someone. That's who you've always been. Remember when you were 8 and you used your birthday money to buy supplies for the animal shelter? Dad. Let me finish. You've always put others first. Sometimes to your own detriment, honestly. Your mother and I have worried about that over the years. But right now, I think that quality is exactly what this situation needs. The galaxy doesn't need another politician or power seeker. Maybe it needs someone who acts from genuine kindness. Emily felt tears running down her face. What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing or offend someone important or... Then you'll apologize and try again, her mother said firmly. Emily Jane Parker, you are one of the strongest people I know. You worked 2 jobs to put yourself through school. You've never backed down from a challenge. This is just a bigger challenge than usual. After the call ended, Emily sat in the darkness of her apartment, watching the lights of the warships pulse against the night sky. She thought about Victor's words, about fate choosing people for roles they never sought. She thought about her father's reminder of who she'd always been. Finally, around 3 in the morning, she picked up her phone and called Victor. I'll do it, she said when he answered. I'll accept the honor and go to the ceremony and all of it. But I have one condition. Name it, Victor said immediately. I do this my way. I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. I'm not going to start acting like royalty or talking differently or whatever. I'm going to that ceremony as myself. Emily Parker from Ohio, who works at a bookstore and eats instant noodles. If that's not good enough for the Emperor or the galaxy, then they don't actually want me. They want some idea of me. There was a pause. Then Victor's warm laugh came through the speaker. Emily Parker, you continue to prove why you deserve this honor. Your terms are more than acceptable. In fact, I suspect the Emperor will appreciate your authenticity far more than any performance. Okay then, Emily said, feeling simultaneously terrified and relieved. Let's do this. How long do I have to prepare? 29 days until the ceremony, Victor said. And I promise you we'll make sure you're ready. Not by changing who you are, but by helping you face this challenge as yourself. Emily looked out at the warships one more time. Victor? Thank you. For everything. Thank you, Emily. For reminding an old soldier that kindness still matters. The next 29 days felt like trying to drink from a fire hose. Emily's small apartment became an impromptu classroom where Victor taught her things she'd never imagined needing to know. How to greet a Chitauri noble without accidentally insulting their hive mother. The difference between a formal bow and a casual nod in 17 different cultures. Which species found eye contact respectful and which found it aggressive. I'm never going to remember all this, Emily said one afternoon, surrounded by holographic displays showing different alien species and their customs. Her head ached from information overload. Victor, sitting across from her with the patience of someone who'd lived 9 centuries, simply smiled. You don't need to memorize everything. You need to understand the principle behind it all. Which is that every species wants the same basic thing, to be seen and respected as they are. Victor gestured to the displays. The Chitauri clicked their mandibles in greeting because it shows they're not preparing to bite. The Krogar avoid eye contact because direct staring is how they challenge for dominance. It's all just different ways of saying, I acknowledge you peacefully. Emily rubbed her temples. Okay, but what if I mess up? What if I accidentally insult someone important? Then you apologize sincerely and move on, Victor said simply. Emily, I need you to understand something. The galaxy has thousands of professional diplomats who know every protocol perfectly. They're polished and polite and utterly forgettable. You know what the galaxy doesn't have enough of? People who genuinely care about others. That seems like a low bar, Emily muttered. You'd be surprised. Victor leaned forward. I've attended diplomatic functions for centuries. I've watched species negotiate treaties while secretly planning betrayals. I've seen alliances formed purely for advantage, dissolve the moment they're no longer useful. Genuine kindness, the kind you showed me, is actually revolutionary in that environment. The journey to the draconian homeworld took 3 days aboard an imperial vessel that was probably worth more than Emily's entire hometown. She had her own suite that was bigger than her apartment, with a viewport that showed the stars streaking past as they traveled through hyperspace. It should have been amazing, but Emily mostly felt nauseated from nerves. Jessica had wanted to come, but security had vetoed it. Too many variables, they'd said. Too much risk. So Emily made the journey with Victor, a dozen guards, and her own spiraling anxiety about everything that could go wrong. What if I tripped during the ceremony? She asked Victor the night before they arrived. What if my voice cracks when I'm supposed to speak? What if? Emily. Victor's voice was gentle but firm. Breathe. The Emperor isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for the person who helped a stranger without hesitation. That's you. Just be you. The draconian homeworld was called Dracora, and it was stunning. Mountains that scraped the sky, cities built into cliff faces, architecture that seemed to defy gravity. The Imperial Palace sat atop the highest peak, a massive structure of white stone and silver metal that gleamed in the light of their sun. Emily's hands were shaking as she got dressed for the ceremony. They'd provided formal clothing, not the elaborate robes the Draconians wore, but something that fit human proportions while still being respectful. Deep blue fabric with silver threading, simple but elegant. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the young woman staring back. The ceremony hall was enormous. Thousands of beings filled the space, Draconians in their finest robes, but also representatives from dozens of other species. Emily recognized some from Victor's lessons. Others were completely alien, shapes and forms she'd never seen before. All of them were there to watch a 19-year-old human college student receive an honor that hadn't been given in 800 years. Emily walked down a central aisle that felt miles long, very aware of thousands of eyes watching her every step. Victor walked beside her, a steady presence that kept her from completely panicking. At the end of the aisle, on a raised platform, sat the Dragon Emperor himself. Raymond Starfire was the most impressive being Emily had ever seen. His scales were pure silver, catching the light like liquid metal. He was enormous, easily 9 feet tall even seated, and radiated authority that made her instinctively want to bow. His eyes, brilliant amber, watched her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read. The ceremony itself was a blur. Emily knelt when Victor quietly indicated she should. Emperor Raymond spoke in a voice that resonated through the entire hall, his words formal and ancient. He talked about the sacred debt, about honor and kindness, about the bond between his family and Emily Parker of Earth. Then he stood and descended from his throne, holding a small object that glowed with inner light. The emblem of the first claw, a silver dragon wrapping around a crystal sphere. He placed it in Emily's hands and the weight of it felt both physical and symbolic. Emily Parker, Emperor Raymond said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You are hereby recognized as friend of the first claw, heartkin to dragons, under the protection of the imperial throne. Your kindness has honored us all. May you carry this distinction with the same grace you showed in earning it. The hall erupted in sound, not quite applause because different species showed approval in different ways. Draconians hummed deep in their chests. Chitauri clicked their mandibles in rapid succession. Humans in the crowd actually did applaud. The cacophony of approval washed over Emily as she stood there, holding the emblem, trying not to cry from overwhelming emotion. After the public ceremony came a private audience with just Emily, Victor, and Emperor Raymond. The Emperor's formal demeanor softened as guards closed the doors behind them. You can breathe now, Raymond said with a slight smile. The hard part is over. Emily let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That was terrifying. You did wonderfully, Raymond assured her. He gestured to comfortable seating, a relief after all the formal standing. Please sit. I wanted to speak with you privately, away from all the ceremony and protocol. Emily sat, still clutching the emblem like a lifeline. Raymond settled across from her, suddenly seeming less like an all-powerful emperor and more like a concerned older brother. Victor told you some of what he's been through, Raymond began. But he probably didn't tell you how worried we've been. For 5 years we've watched him fade. He wouldn't accept help from family. Wouldn't let us reach him. We respected his need for space, but every day we feared we'd get word that he'd given up entirely. Emily glanced at Victor, who looked uncomfortable with being discussed. And then we got a very strange call, Raymond continued. Victor, who hadn't contacted us in years, suddenly announced he was invoking the sacred debt ascendant. For a human college student who'd paid for his groceries. Do you know what my first reaction was? Emily shook her head. Confusion, Raymond admitted, followed immediately by hope. Because if Victor was invoking ancient law, if he was concerning himself with honor and duty again, it meant he'd found something worth living for. You gave my brother back to us, Emily Parker. Not with grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but with simple kindness at a checkout line. For that, I am personally grateful beyond what words can express. Emily felt tears threatening. I just saw someone who needed help. Exactly, Raymond said warmly. You just help. No calculation, no expectation. That's rare, Emily. Especially in circles of power. Never lose that. The journey back to New Terra felt different. Emily watched the stars with new perspective. She'd stood before the most powerful leaders in the galaxy and survived. More than survived, she'd apparently made a good impression, if the messages flooding in were any indication. But she'd also made a decision. She wasn't going to let this change who she fundamentally was. 6 months later, life had found a new rhythm. Emily had gone back to school, though now she attended classes with 2 draconian guards standing discreetly at the back of lecture halls. Her professors had adjusted surprisingly well. Her classmates were initially starstruck, but eventually got used to having minor galactic nobility in their study groups. She graduated on time. Victor had insisted she finish her degree, arguing that education mattered regardless of status. The ceremony had been surreal, with news drones capturing her receiving a diploma she'd worked 4 years to earn. But the thing she was most proud of wasn't the title or the honor or even her degree. It was the foundation she'd started with Victor's help. The Small Gestures Foundation promoted exactly what its name suggested, encouraging people across all species to perform simple acts of kindness. No grand charitable donations required, no elaborate volunteering schemes. Just helping strangers when you saw they needed it. The foundation had gone viral across human space and was spreading to other species. There were reports of Chitauri helping stranded travelers. Krogar construction workers teaching neighborhood kids to build. Even some draconian nobles were photographed doing ordinary volunteer work. Emily's one act at a grocery store had somehow sparked a movement. She'd also gone back to work at the bookstore. Her boss had been understanding about the months-long absence and the fact that Emily now came with a security detail. The guards, a rotating team who'd become almost like friends, would stand near the science fiction section, trying to look inconspicuous while being 7-foot-tall dragons in armor. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the ceremony, Emily was restocking shelves when she heard a commotion at the checkout counter. She looked up to see an elderly Krogar, one of the massive bear-like aliens, struggling with the payment system. The cashier looked frustrated and a line was forming. Emily didn't hesitate. She set down the book she was holding and walked over. "Hi, I can help with that," she said gently to the Krogar, whose name tag read Construction Safety Instructor. The Krogar looked embarrassed, his fur bristling slightly in agitation. "This human technology is confusing. In my day we used different systems." "No problem," Emily said. She helped him work through the payment interface, explaining each step patiently. When his card finally worked, the relief on his face was obvious. "Thank you, young human," he said gratefully. "Anytime," Emily replied with a genuine smile. From their position near the science fiction section, she saw her guards exchange glances. One of them, a younger dragon named Kyle who'd been with her security detail for 3 months, smiled slightly and shook his head. They'd seen this play out dozens of times. Emily helping customers who seemed confused, paying for kids who came up short for books, spending her breaks talking to lonely elderly people who came to the store just for company. After her shift, Victor stopped by as he often did. He'd taken a position as a military advisor again, but spent much of his free time with Emily. They developed a genuine friendship beyond the honor-bound obligation. They walked through a nearby park, guards maintaining a discreet distance. "I heard about you helping that Krogar today," Victor said. Emily shrugged. "He needed help figuring out the payment system. It wasn't a big deal." "That's what you always say," Victor chuckled. "Emily, do you know what I realized today? In all my centuries, all my battles and victories and military campaigns that changed the course of civilizations, I never learned as much about real strength as I've learned watching you these past 6 months." "What do you mean?" "You've had every excuse to let this change you," Victor said. "You have status now, protection, resources. You've met with emperors and ambassadors. You've been on the cover of every major news outlet in the galaxy. But you still help strangers with their groceries. You still work at a bookstore. You still treat everyone you meet with genuine kindness. That's just being a decent person," Emily said. "Exactly," Victor agreed. "And that's revolutionary. Because most people, given what you have, would let it change them. They'd become absorbed in status and importance. But you haven't. You're the same person who helped me at Miller's grocery, just with better security." They sat on a bench overlooking a pond where local kids were feeding something that resembled ducks but definitely wasn't. Victor looked at Emily with something like wonder in his ancient eyes. "I spent centuries thinking strength meant winning battles," he said quietly. "Conquering territory, outmaneuvering enemies, protecting my people through force. And all of that has its place. But you've taught me something different. Real strength is maintaining who you are when the entire galaxy is watching. Being kind when you have every excuse not to be. Staying humble when you have every reason to be proud. Emily felt her throat tighten with emotion. You give me too much credit. I give you exactly the right amount of credit, Victor countered. Emily, I want to show you something. He pulled up a holographic display from his personal device. It showed news feeds from across the galaxy. Story after story of beings from different species performing acts of kindness. A draconian helping a human child who'd lost their parent in a crowded spaceport. A Chitauri paying for a stranger's meal. Krogar workers rebuilding a home destroyed by weather, refusing payment. This is happening everywhere now, Victor said. They're calling it the Parker effect. Your example, just being consistently kind despite everything, has inspired beings across hundreds of worlds. Governments are reporting drops in crime. Tensions between species are easing. All because people saw that if Emily Parker can stay decent while being essentially galactic royalty, they can be decent in their own lives. Emily watched the feeds with tears in her eyes. She saw humans and aliens alike doing exactly what she'd done that day in Miller's grocery, just helping because someone needed it. I didn't mean to start a movement, she whispered. The best movements are never started intentionally, Victor replied. They begin when someone simply does the right thing, and others recognize it as right and choose to follow. As the sun set over New Terra, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Emily thought about how much had changed in 6 months, and how much had stayed exactly the same. She was still Emily Parker from Ohio. Still the girl who ate instant noodles and stressed about assignments. Still someone who helped strangers in grocery stores. The only difference was now the whole galaxy was watching. And apparently learning. Victor stood, offering his hand to help her up. Come on. I promised your mother I'd make sure you ate actual food today, not just coffee and determination. Emily laughed, taking his hand. As they walked back through the park, a young human woman and an ancient dragon warrior who'd found unexpected friendship, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. She'd faced down emperors and navigated galactic politics. She'd given speeches and attended ceremonies. She'd had her life turned completely upside down. And through it all she'd remained herself. That, Victor had told her once, was the whole point. The galaxy didn't need another politician or another power seeker. It needed someone who'd help an old dragon buy soup and bandages, expecting nothing in return. It needed kindness. And Emily Parker, friend of the First Claw, former college student and current bookstore employee, had plenty of that to give. The warships still hung in New Terra sky sometimes, though less obtrusively now. Security still followed her everywhere. News drones still occasionally tried to catch footage of her daily life. But in the end, none of that really mattered. What mattered was that when someone needed help, Emily still stepped forward without hesitation. And across the galaxy, millions of beings were learning to do the same. All because one human girl saw an old dragon struggling at a checkout line and decided that 47 credits was a small price to pay for basic human, or dragon, decency. Sometimes, Victor reflected as they walked, the smallest gestures created the biggest ripples. And sometimes, a simple act of kindness could save not just one life, but help heal an entire galaxy.